There's a specific quality to morning light in old-growth forest that you can't replicate anywhere else. It filters through layers of Douglas fir and western red cedar, fractures into geometric patterns across the understory, and creates pockets of illumination that shift like living things. On August 14, 2019, that light fell across my abandoned camp in a way that made everything look staged. The overturned cookpot, the scattered field notes, the camera still mounted on its tripod, red recording light blinking steadily, still running. After 3 days. My name is David Forrester. For 8 years I documented what I believe, what I know, to be a solitary female member of an unclassified hominid species living within a 12-mile range of the Dark Divide wilderness. I filmed her 43 times across 127 hours of footage. I recorded seasonal behavioral patterns, territorial markers, and what can only be described as ritualistic behavior involving arranged stones and deliberately broken branches. I was careful, methodical. I maintained distance, respected boundaries, and never once approached within what I calculated to be her comfort zone of approximately 150 feet. And then the rangers found my camp while I was away resupplying, found my equipment, found my research, found 8 years of documentation that I'd kept hidden from every institution, every colleague, every regulatory body that might have turned observation into exploitation. The camera was recording when they arrived. I have footage of their discovery, their confusion, their radio calls. The moment they realized what they were looking at on my external monitor, hours of playback footage showing something that shouldn't exist. This isn't a story about discovery. It's a story about the consequences of documentation, about the impossibility of keeping secrets in a surveilled world, about what happens when someone witnesses something extraordinary and makes the fatal mistake of creating evidence. The Gifford-Pinchot National Forest spans 1.3 million acres of volcanic landscape carved by ancient glaciers and more recent eruptions. Mount St. Helens forms its northern boundary, a constant reminder that the earth here is young, violent, and still shaping itself. The terrain is hostile to casual exploration, dense understory, sudden elevation changes, creek beds that appear and vanish with seasonal flow, and a silence so complete it feels accusatory. I came here to disappear, to leave behind a failed marriage, a stagnant academic career, and the comfortable numbness of urban anonymity. I found something that had been disappearing for far longer, and in trying to preserve evidence of her existence, I may have destroyed the very thing I hoped to protect. I wasn't looking for her when we first crossed paths. July 2011. I'd been living in a modified camper van for 3 months, working seasonal trail maintenance for the Forest Service. The pay was minimal, the work physical, and the isolation exactly what I needed. Clearing deadfall, marking hazards, maintaining primitive campsites for backpackers who rarely came. My assigned section was the upper reaches of the Cispus River drainage, terrain too rough for casual hikers, too remote for weekend warriors. I'd go 2 weeks without seeing another human. It was perfect. The first indication came on a Wednesday morning in late July. I was clearing brush near an unmarked camping area when I noticed systematic disturbance that didn't match any known wildlife pattern. A fallen log had been moved, not rolled naturally downhill, but lifted and repositioned perpendicular to its original orientation. The effort required would have needed multiple people or equipment. I was alone. No equipment tracks, no footprints except my own. I documented it with photographs and GPS coordinates, noting it in my personal journal as anomalous structural modification, unknown cause, professional habit. I'd been a field biologist before the divorce, before the department politics, before I'd walked away from everything. 3 days later I found another, a sapling bent at 45 degrees and held in place by stones arranged at its base. Not natural, not accidental. The sapling was still living. This had been done recently enough that the tree hadn't begun compensatory growth patterns. Someone was marking territory, or communicating, or both. I began paying closer attention, modified my patrol routes to circle back through areas where I'd found these markers, started carrying better cameras, a Nikon D800 with a 200-500mm lens, purchased with the last of my savings from the life I'd left behind. The third marker appeared within 48 hours of my increased surveillance. A pattern was emerging. Whoever or whatever was creating these signs was responding to my presence. Not fleeing, responding. On August 3, 2011, I saw her for the first time. I'd set up an observation point overlooking a meadow where I documented 3 separate markers. Arrived before dawn. Stayed motionless. Waited. She emerged from the tree line at 6:47 a.m. I have the timestamp on the first photograph. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the camera. She stood approximately 7.5 feet tall, estimating from nearby reference trees, covered in dark auburn hair, darker along the ridge of her spine and shoulders. She moved with a pronounced limp, favoring her right side. Old injury, judging by how naturally she compensated for it. She spent 11 minutes in that meadow, foraging, turning over rocks, selecting something, grubs, perhaps, or tubers, and eating methodically. Her hands were large but dexterous, fingers that manipulated objects with clear intention and skill. I shot 247 photographs. Most were unusable, my hands trembling, focus hunting in the low light, branches interfering with line of sight. But 37 were clear enough to show details: the structure of her hands, the musculature of her shoulders, the obvious intelligence in how she approached foraging tasks. When she left, she paused at the tree line, turned, looked directly at where I was hidden. I stopped breathing. She held that gaze for perhaps 5 seconds, then made a sound, low, resonant, brief, not aggressive, almost conversational. Then she was gone. I sat in that position for another hour, trying to process what I'd witnessed. Every rational part of my brain insisted this was impossible. Sasquatch didn't exist, couldn't exist. Every credible scientific analysis had dismissed the phenomenon as misidentification, hoaxes, and pattern-seeking behavior. But I had photographs. I had timestamps. I had evidence captured by equipment that doesn't hallucinate. That night, back at my van, I reviewed the images obsessively, zoomed in on details, analyzed proportions, cross-referenced with every piece of primate morphology I could remember from my academic training. Nothing matched. The proportions were wrong for any known ape. The posture was too upright, the hand structure too similar to human but scaled dramatically. I faced a choice: report this or investigate further. Reporting meant park rangers, wildlife officials, possibly federal involvement, media attention, the circus of cryptozoology enthusiasts and skeptics, and most critically, the end of her solitude, the end of whatever life she'd managed to carve out in this remote section of forest. I chose investigation. I requested an extension of my seasonal work. The Forest Service, perpetually understaffed, approved immediately. 6 more months, then another 6. I became a semi-permanent fixture, the eccentric guy who preferred backcountry isolation to human contact. They had no idea how right they were. I established protocols. Never approach closer than 150 feet. Never make sudden movements. Never attempt contact. Document everything, but prioritize her comfort over my curiosity. I set up motion-activated cameras at strategic points, game trails, water sources, the meadow where I'd first seen her. I marked my own patterns, creating predictable patrol routes so she could anticipate my presence and avoid me if she chose. But increasingly, she didn't avoid me. By September 2011, I had documented 7 separate sightings. She appeared comfortable with my distant observation, would forage while I watched from established positions, would vocalize occasionally, those low, brief sounds that seemed like acknowledgement rather than warning. I began leaving things, small offerings, apples from my supplies, hazelnuts collected during patrols, never approached to deliver them. I'd leave items at the edge of clearings and retreat, check back hours or days later. They were always gone, and often something would be left in return. River stones arranged in patterns, feathers tucked into bark crevices near my regular observation points. We were communicating, slowly, carefully, 2 species establishing mutual recognition across a boundary neither of us fully understood. My field journals from that first year are meticulous: weather patterns, seasonal changes in her foraging behavior, the progression of her limp, some days barely noticeable, others pronounced, notes about her apparent age, her solitary nature, the absence of any other individuals in the area. I titled her Subject Sigma in my documentation, clinical distance, scientific objectivity. But in my private thoughts, I called her something else, survivor, because that's what she was, the last of something, alone in a forest that was itself under constant threat from logging, recreation pressure, and the relentless human expansion into every remaining wild space. By December 2011, I had decided I would document her existence, but I would never share that documentation. Not while she lived. Not while she was vulnerable. I would be her witness, her recorder, her guardian. It seemed like the least I could do. It seemed, at the time, like enough. The winter of 2011-2012 changed everything. Heavy snowfall isolated the upper Cispus drainage. My seasonal contract ended in November, but I stayed. Moved my van to a private property boundary, 5 acres owned by a retired logger who was happy to have someone watching the place for $100 a month. I wasn't officially employed anymore, but I couldn't leave. She was still out there, and winter in the Cascades is brutal. Temperatures regularly dropped below freezing. Snow accumulated in depths that made travel nearly impossible. Most wildlife either migrated to lower elevations or entered dormancy, but she remained. I saw her 4 times that winter. Each sighting showed increasing desperation. The limp was worse. She was favoring that leg even more severely. Her foraging was less successful. Snow covered the usual food sources. She'd lost weight. I could see ribs beneath the fur when she reached for something overhead. In January, I made a decision that still haunts me. I started leaving food caches. Not just apples anymore. Substantial provisions. Smoked fish purchased from a tribal smokehouse near Packwood. Nuts and dried fruits. High-calorie, non-perishable items wrapped in waterproof bags and placed in locations where I'd documented her regular movements. I was interfering. Crossing the line from observation to intervention. Everything about field biology training says you don't do this. You don't feed wild animals, you don't alter natural behaviors, you don't create dependency. But I couldn't watch her starve. The caches disappeared within hours of placement. She found them immediately. Her territorial knowledge was absolute. She knew every square foot of her range, and she started leaving acknowledgments. The stone arrangements became more elaborate. Patterns that seemed almost symbolic. Circles, lines, shapes I couldn't interpret but recognized as intentional. We were having a conversation. Crude, symbolic, but genuine. By March, the snow began melting. She'd survived. When I saw her again in early April, she looked healthier. The weight had returned. The limp was still present but seemed less painful. I'd helped her survive winter, and in doing so, I'd fundamentally altered the relationship from observation to, what? Partnership? Dependence? I didn't know. What I did know, I couldn't stop now. The years blurred together. Each season brought new patterns, new behaviors, new understanding. In 2013, I documented what appeared to be grieving behavior. She spent 3 consecutive days at the same location, a small clearing near a creek bed. She'd bring stones and arrange them carefully, sit for hours, vocalize in sounds that carried unmistakable emotional weight. Something had died there, or someone. Was she the last? Had there been others, family, a mate, offspring who hadn't survived? The implications devastated me. If she was solitary not by choice but by loss, then what I was documenting wasn't just a species, but its extinction in real time. I began expanding my search radius, set up additional camera stations, hiked sections of the dark divide I'd never explored, looking for evidence of others. I found nothing. Hundreds of hours of footage showing elk, black bears, cougars, bobcats, normal Pacific Northwest megafauna, but no others like her. She was alone. In 2015, she did something extraordinary. I'd been documenting her from a familiar observation point when she approached closer than ever before, maybe 60 feet. Still outside my established boundary, but significantly inside her usual comfort distance. She was carrying something, a branch approximately 3 feet long with smaller twigs still attached. She placed it on the ground. Then deliberately she broke off the smaller twigs one by one, arranged them in a pattern, parallel lines, evenly spaced. Then she looked at me, direct eye contact, held my gaze. Then she left. I approached after she'd gone, photographed the arrangement, tried to understand. It looked like counting, or categorization, or language. She was demonstrating cognitive capability, showing me she understood symbolic representation. Proving to whom? To me? To herself? That she was intelligent, aware, communicative. I sat beside that arrangement and cried, because I understood what she was doing. She was asking to be seen, not as an animal, as a person, and I couldn't give her that. Because being seen as a person meant being discovered, and discovery meant death, not immediate maybe, but inevitable. From researchers, from curiosity seekers, from the machinery of a world that turns everything rare into either spectacle or resource. By 2017, I'd accumulated thousands of hours of footage. My equipment had upgraded. Better cameras, better audio recording, motion sensors with cellular notifications. I'd become technically sophisticated out of necessity. My van had become a mobile surveillance center, monitors showing live feeds from 8 different camera stations, hard drives storing years of documentation, journals filled with behavioral notes, seasonal patterns, environmental correlations. I'd also become completely isolated from human society. I spoke to maybe 3 people regularly: the property owner who let me park there, the postal clerk in Randall where I received supply shipments, and a satellite phone contact at the Forest Service who checked in quarterly to make sure I hadn't died in the woods. I had no friends, no family who stayed in contact, no romantic prospects, no life outside of documentation. I was becoming what I studied: solitary, wary, existing in the margins. In 2018, she began showing signs of aging. The limp was chronic now. She moved more slowly, spent longer periods resting. Her foraging efficiency decreased. She'd dig for tubers and give up when previous years showed persistence. I started leaving food again, not just winter caches, regular provisions, trying to compensate for what age was taking from her. I was keeping her alive artificially, extending her existence beyond what nature would allow. But I couldn't stop, because when she died, there would be nothing left. No others, no hope of breeding population, just extinction, silent and complete. I was documenting the end of something ancient, and I was complicit in dragging it out. August 11th, 2019. The day everything ended. I'd been away for 3 days. A necessary resupply run to Portland. My van needed maintenance. I needed equipment. Battery banks, storage drives, weatherproof housings for cameras. The infrastructure of long-term surveillance requires constant upkeep. I left the primary camp camera running. Battery life was good. Solar panels kept everything charged. Motion activation would capture anything significant during my absence. When I returned on the 14th, something felt wrong immediately. The approach trail had been disturbed. Boot prints, multiple sets, recent. Within the last 24 hours, my camp had been discovered. I approached carefully, found 2 park rangers standing near my equipment setup. Younger guy, maybe late 20s, and an older woman with supervisor insignia. They heard me coming. Both turned. The woman's hand went to her radio instinctively. "David Forrester?" she called out. I stopped walking. "Yes, I'm Ranger Carla Bryce, site supervisor for the Cowlitz Valley District. This is Ranger Tim Morrison. We need to talk about your setup here." The camera was still running, red light blinking, pointed at them. "I can explain," I started. "We've been reviewing your footage," Ranger Bryce interrupted. The external monitor was displaying playback when we arrived. "Mr. Forrester, what exactly have you been documenting up here?" My stomach dropped. The monitor. I'd left footage queued up. A compilation I'd been reviewing before leaving. 20 minutes of Subject Sigma's clearest appearances, edited together for my own analysis. They'd seen her. That's wildlife observation, I managed. Personal research project. Ranger Morrison spoke for the first time. "Sir, that's not any wildlife I've ever seen. And I've worked these forests for 6 years. Ranger Bryce pulled out a tablet, opened a photo. One of my still captures. Subject Sigma reaching for huckleberries. Full profile. Absolutely clear. This is from your camera array. We accessed the feeds using the cellular backup credentials listed in your equipment documentation. We've reviewed approximately 40 hours of footage so far. You had no right. We had every right. You're operating undisclosed surveillance equipment on federal land without proper permits. But that's not the primary concern right now." She paused. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said quietly. "Don't insult my intelligence. I mean, I don't know taxonomically. I don't know what species. I just know she's here. Has been for at least 8 years. And she's alone." Ranger Bryce and Morrison exchanged glances. Some kind of nonverbal communication I couldn't read. "Sit down, Mr. Forrester," Bryce said, gesturing to my camp chair. "We need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with here." I told them everything. What choice did I have? 8 years of observation, the behavioral patterns, the communication attempts, the food caches, the evidence I'd accumulated showing clear intelligence, tool use, symbolic thinking. They listened without interrupting. Morrison took notes on a waterproof pad. Bryce's expression remained carefully neutral. When I finished, Bryce was quiet for a long moment. "Why didn't you report this?" she finally asked. "Because reporting it would kill her. You know that. Media attention, research teams, civilian hunters wanting proof, cryptozoology enthusiasts. This forest would be overrun within a week. She'd flee, and we'd pursue. Or she'd be captured. Either way, her life as she's lived it for decades would end." "That's not your decision to make," Morrison said. "It absolutely was. I was the only one who knew. That made it my responsibility to protect." Ranger Bryce rubbed her temples. This is unprecedented. We're talking about an unidentified large primate in the Pacific Northwest. If this footage is authentic, it's authentic. Then we're dealing with the most significant zoological discovery in a century, maybe ever. This can't stay hidden. "Why not?" I challenged. "She survived this long specifically because she stayed hidden. The moment we shine a light on her existence, we sign her death warrant. Or we protect her," Bryce countered. "Critical habitat designation, endangered species status, federal protection with criminal penalties for harassment or harm. How long does that process take? Months? Years? And what happens to her during that time? While bureaucrats argue about jurisdiction and environmental impact assessments?" Morrison spoke quietly. "What happens to her when you're not here? You've been feeding her, supporting her survival. You're not going to live forever. What happens when you die and no one else knows she exists?" That hit harder than I expected, because I'd thought about it, obsessed over it during long nights in the van. I was 61 years old, in decent health, but time was finite. What was my exit strategy? What happened to my documentation when I was gone? I had no answer. "We need to escalate this," Bryce said. "District supervisor, regional office, probably federal wildlife authorities. This is beyond my authority level." "And her?" I asked. "What happens to her while you're escalating?" "We protect her. Immediate closure of this section. No public access. We keep this contained until proper protection frameworks are established. You can't contain this, someone will leak. Someone always leaks." Bryce met my eyes. "Then we work fast. And we hope the system moves faster than the media cycle for once." She pulled out her radio. "Base, this is Bryce. I need secure communication with Regional Director Maxwell. Priority Alpha. I'll need encryption protocols." The radio crackled. "Copy. Stand by for routing." Morrison was still reviewing my footage on the monitor. "Jesus," he muttered. "Look at the hand structure, the way she manipulates objects. That's not ape behavior. That's human," I finished. "That's human-level cognition, which is why this is so dangerous." The radio crackled again. "Bryce, you're routed. Encryption active, go ahead." Ranger Bryce took a breath. Then, "Regional Director Maxwell. This is Supervisor Bryce at Cispus River Drainage. I'm reporting a Code Zulu situation. Unknown large hominid species, confirmed visual and video documentation, intelligence indicators present. Immediate containment protocols required." Silence on the other end. Then, "Repeat your last, Bryce. Did you say Code Zulu?" "Confirmed. I'm looking at footage right now. This is legitimate." "Holy hell. Secure the site, full perimeter, no one in or out until I arrive. I'm airborne in 30 minutes. The radio went silent. Ranger Bryce looked at me. "For what it's worth, Mr. Forrester, I understand why you did this. I don't agree with hiding it, but I understand. Doesn't matter now," I said quietly. "It's out of my hands." The camera was still recording, still running, capturing this moment, the end of 8 years of secrecy, the beginning of whatever came next. I looked at that red recording light and felt something between relief and grief. I'd protected her for as long as I could. Now she belonged to the world. God help her. Regional Director Maxwell arrived by helicopter at 1600 hours. She came with 2 wildlife specialists, a law enforcement ranger, and enough equipment to establish what she called immediate containment protocols. Within 3 hours, the area was designated an emergency closure zone. Orange tape, locked trail access, signage citing hazardous conditions pending investigation. Maxwell was mid-50s, compact, and moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in crisis management. She reviewed my footage in silence for 40 minutes while her team cataloged my equipment, copied hard drives, and established a perimeter. When she finished, she closed the laptop carefully. "Mr. Forrester, I need you to understand the magnitude of what you've documented." "I understand. I don't think you do. This isn't just a new species. This is a hominid, great ape at minimum, possibly closer to genus Homo. The scientific implications alone would justify decades of research. But the legal implications, international wildlife treaties, endangered species designations, cultural considerations if this is related to indigenous traditional knowledge, this touches every regulatory framework we have, which is why I didn't report it, which is why you should have reported it, because now we're responding in crisis mode instead of implementing measured, planned protections. She paused. How long has she been in decline? The question caught me off guard. What? The footage shows clear aging markers, decreased mobility, reduced foraging efficiency. You've been supplementing her food supply. How long? Intermittently since 2012, regularly since 2018. So you've been artificially extending her lifespan. I've been helping her survive. Same thing. And when you die, or when you can't maintain this level of support, what happens to her then? I had no answer, because she was right. I'd created dependency without exit strategy. Maxwell stood. Here's what's going to happen. We're establishing immediate protection. This area is now restricted access, no public, no exceptions. We're bringing in a team, wildlife biologists, primatologists, conservation geneticists. We document properly, establish baseline data, determine if there are others, and build a sustainable protection framework. You can't just bring researchers in, she'll flee. Or nothing. This is happening. The question is whether you're part of the solution or part of the problem. You have 8 years of behavioral data, movement patterns, communication protocols. You can help us do this right, or you can be sidelined while we figure it out ourselves. It wasn't really a choice. The next 2 weeks were a controlled chaos. A research team arrived, 4 scientists led by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a primatologist from UC Davis. They treated my documentation with a mix of awe and skepticism, the way scientists do when confronted with data that contradicts everything their training says should be possible. Dr. Vasquez spent 3 days reviewing my footage. Then she pulled me aside. Your observational protocols are solid. Distance maintenance, non-interference approach, longitudinal tracking. But the food supplementation, that changes everything. I know. Do you? Because now we don't know if we're observing natural behavior or conditioned responses to human provisioning. Everything you've documented after 2012 is scientifically compromised. She would have died. Maybe, maybe not. We'll never know now. She wasn't being cruel, just honest. But what's done is done. The question now is, how do we assess her current state and needs without further disruption? You use me, I said. She knows me, tolerates me. You bring in new people and she'll disappear into terrain you'll never navigate successfully. Vasquez considered this. You'd work with us, full transparency, share all documentation, all methods, all protocols. If it keeps her alive and minimizes disruption, no guarantees on either. I know. We established observation protocols. I'd maintain my usual patterns. She was accustomed to my presence. Research team would observe from extreme distance using telephoto equipment. No attempts at closer approach, no capture, no tranquilization. Observation only. For 3 days it worked. I saw her twice. She appeared wary, aware that something had changed, that the forest felt different. But she stayed in her territory, continued foraging, maintained routines. The research team captured footage that made my documentation look amateur. High-resolution thermal imaging showing her core body temperature. Audio analysis showing vocal patterns with structural complexity suggesting proto-language. Motion capture data, analyzing her gait biomechanics. Dr. Vasquez's preliminary assessment. She's elderly for a large primate, probably late 50s to early 60s if we're extrapolating from great ape longevity. The leg injury is chronic arthritis, likely from an old fracture that healed poorly. She's managing, but she's in steady decline. Without intervention, I'd estimate she has maybe 5 years. With intervention, medical care, supplemental feeding, habitat protection, possibly 10 to 15. What kind of intervention? I asked. We'd need to establish trust, close enough proximity to deliver medication, maybe even physical examination, though that's extremely high risk for both sides. She'll never allow that. Then we document her final years and hope there are others, because if she's the last Mr. Forrester, then we're witnessing extinction, and all we can do is watch. On the 4th day, everything collapsed. Someone leaked. A photo appeared on Twitter, one of my captures, subject Sigma in clear profile. posted by an anonymous account with the caption, "Sasquatch Real, Federal Government Covering Up Discovery in Washington State." Within 6 hours, 3 million impressions. Within 12 hours, news helicopters circling the area. Within 24 hours, civilian hunters, cryptozoology enthusiasts, and media teams trying to breach the closure perimeter. The Forest Service established armed patrols. Federal law enforcement arrived. The area became a militarized zone, and she vanished. Camera traps showed nothing. Motion sensors silent. She'd retreated into terrain so remote that even I didn't know her fallback positions. I'd lost her. After 8 years of documentation, careful relationship building, mutual understanding, she was gone. Dr. Vasquez tried to be diplomatic. She's smart. She recognized threat. She's surviving. But I knew better. I knew the calories required to maintain her body mass. I knew the limited range of her territory. I knew she was old, injured, and now displaced from familiar resources. I'd protected her for 8 years, and in the end, I'd been the instrument of her destruction. The media circus lasted 2 weeks. News crews camped at the closure perimeter. Documentarians negotiated with park officials. The term, Gifford Pinchot Sasquatch, started trending. Amateur researchers arrived with thermal cameras and elaborate theories. The Forest Service held exactly one press conference. Regional Director Maxwell stood at a podium and delivered a statement so carefully worded it said almost nothing. The Forest Service is investigating reports of an unidentified large primate in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. Until investigation is complete, a section of the Dark Divide Wilderness remains closed for public safety. We ask the public to respect these closures and allow scientific assessment to proceed without interference. No confirmation, no denial, just bureaucratic deflection. It didn't matter. The internet had decided. Sasquatch was real, the government was hiding it, and every conspiracy theory about federal cover-ups was suddenly validated. I stopped reading the coverage after the 3rd day, stopped watching the news. It was all noise, speculation, arguing, people who'd never spent a day in these forests claiming expertise based on YouTube videos and Reddit threads. None of them understood. None of them had seen what I'd seen. Intelligence, awareness, personhood. To them, she was a specimen, a trophy, proof of something to justify their worldview. To me, she was just her, an individual trying to survive in a world that had forgotten her kind existed, and now she was gone. Dr. Vasquez's team maintained search protocols for 11 days, expanded camera coverage, deployed audio monitoring equipment, used drones with thermal imaging. Nothing. She's either left the area entirely or found somewhere with enough canopy coverage that thermal can't penetrate, Vasquez told me on day 12. Without your established relationship, we have no way to locate her. So we stop looking, I said. That's not. Yes, it is. We stop looking. We maintain the closure to keep civilians out, but we stop active searching. We let her be. We don't know if she's surviving, and searching won't tell us. It'll just drive her further away. The kindest thing we can do now is leave her alone. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. You think she's dying? I think she's old. She's stressed. And she's been pushed out of territory she's known for decades. So yes, I think she's dying. And I think trying to save her now would just make her final days miserable. That's not a scientific approach. No, it's an ethical one. On September 3rd, 2019, I violated closure protocols. Waited until 0200 hours, when the patrol rotation left a 40-minute gap in coverage, hiked into her core territory, the areas I'd known for 8 years, moved quietly, following paths I'd memorized in the dark. I wasn't trying to find her. I was trying to say goodbye. I left something at each of her primary locations. The meadow where I'd first seen her, hazelnuts arranged in a circle, the creek bed where she'd mourned, fresh flowers, tiger lilies, her favorite, the clearing where she'd demonstrated symbolic thinking, a carved wooden figure, humanoid, simple, hours of work with a knife and a piece of cedar, offerings, apologies, acknowledgement. At each location, I spoke quietly, knowing she probably couldn't hear, but needing to say it anyway. I'm sorry. I tried to protect you. I failed. I hope you understand. I never wanted this. I never wanted them to know. I hope you're somewhere safe. I hope you're not alone. I hope you forgive me. I made it back to the perimeter by 0430. No one saw me. 3 days later, Ranger Morrison found me at my van. You went in, didn't you? He asked. Into the closure zone. Night of the 3rd. I didn't answer. I'm not reporting it, but others notice the gaps in patrol coverage. They'll close that loophole. Just don't do it again. I won't. I got to say what I needed to say. Morrison sat on my van's bumper. Young guy, maybe 27, with that earnest quality Rangers get when they're new enough to still believe the system works. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I think you did the right thing. Keeping her secret. Protecting her. My supervisor would fire me for saying that, but it's true. Doesn't matter now. Maybe, maybe not. He pulled out his phone, showed me a photo. Thermal image. Date stamp September 4th, 0600 hours. Location, one of the camera stations near her core territory. A heat signature, large, bipedal, moving through the frame. We're not broadcasting this, Morrison said. Official position is she's left the area. But between you and me, she's still here, still moving, still surviving. I stared at that image, that fuzzy, pixelated proof of existence. She found what you left, Morrison continued. The flowers. One of the daytime cameras caught her examining them. She didn't take them, but I don't know how to describe it, she touched them, careful, like they meant something. I couldn't speak. I'll keep watching for her, Morrison said. Quiet. No reports that would draw attention. Just making sure she's okay, if that's all right with you. I nodded. We're closing the investigation in 2 weeks, he continued. Official finding will be insufficient evidence to confirm species identification. Closure will remain in place for ecological sensitivity and erosion control. She'll be protected, just not named. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Vasquez. She's the one who convinced Maxwell that going public would do more harm than good. That sometimes protection means obscurity. Morrison stood. She's still out there, Mr. Forrester, and she knows you tried. That probably doesn't fix anything, but maybe it counts for something. He walked away, leaving me alone with that thermal image and the crushing weight of maybe. Maybe she was okay. Maybe she understood. Maybe 8 years of careful observation hadn't ended in complete disaster. Maybe. The official investigation closed on September 19, 2019. Press release summary. Following extensive survey of the Dark Divide region, Forest Service researchers found insufficient evidence to confirm claims of an unknown large primate species. The closure area will remain restricted due to ongoing ecological sensitivity monitoring and public safety concerns related to terrain instability. Translation: we are burying this, and we're keeping the area locked down. The cryptozoology community exploded with accusations of cover-up. I became a minor internet celebrity among Bigfoot enthusiasts, the guy who documented proof that the government then suppressed. I received hundreds of emails, dozens of interview requests, and at least 15 offers to purchase my footage for amounts that would have changed my life. I declined everything. Didn't respond. Let my email inbox fill with noise while I focused on the only thing that mattered, monitoring the closure zone remotely through whatever scraps of information I could gather. Ranger Morrison became my unofficial contact. He'd text me once a week. Motion sensor activity, grid C4, or possible vocalization recorded northern sector. Never specifics. Never anything that could be used as evidence. Just enough to let me know she was still there. Still alive. It was enough. Dr. Vasquez left in October but called me before departing. I wanted you to know. My official report recommends permanent closure and minimal intervention protocols. If she's there, she's surviving without us. That's the best possible outcome. Thank you. I also wanted to say, your approach was flawed scientifically but sound ethically. You prioritized her welfare over your career, your reputation, everything. That's rare. And even though the methodology was compromised, the documentation you created is extraordinary. 43 separate visual confirmations across 8 years. Behavioral data showing clear intelligence, tool use, symbolic thinking, communication attempts. That's unprecedented in cryptozoological research. Not much use if it's buried. It's not buried. It's preserved. Secure archives, accessed only by researchers with legitimate need and appropriate clearance. If the time is right, that data will transform our understanding of human evolutionary biology, behavioral ecology, conservation ethics. Your work matters, David. It just matters privately. I can live with that. I hope so, because you're probably the only person who'll ever know the full story, and that's a lonely burden. She wasn't wrong. By November, the media attention had mostly evaporated. News cycles moved on. The Gifford Pinchot Sasquatch became another internet footnote, somewhere between confirmed and debunked, believed by enthusiasts, dismissed by skeptics, ignored by everyone else. Perfect obscurity. The closure remained. Park officials cited erosion concerns, unstable terrain, and ongoing assessment requirements. No sunset clause. No timeline for reopening. Bureaucratic language that meant this area is locked down indefinitely, which meant she had protection. Not official endangered species designation with its legal frameworks and enforcement mechanisms, but practical protection through access restriction and institutional indifference. Sometimes the best conservation outcome is being too boring to warrant further attention. I left Washington in December 2019. Couldn't maintain the van lifestyle anymore. Too old, too tired, too emotionally exhausted. I moved to a small rental in Olympia, close enough to the forest if needed, far enough to establish distance. Found work doing environmental compliance consulting. Desk job reviewing impact assessments and permit applications. It paid bills and required zero emotional investment. I was functional, empty, waiting. Morrison texted me occasionally, always brief. Grid C4 activity. Possible nest structure, northwest sector. Audio hit, 0400 hours. Evidence of her continued existence. Proof that the ending wasn't complete disaster. In February 2020, Morrison sent something different. A photo. Night vision image. Blurry but clear enough. Her. She was thinner. The limp more pronounced. But alive. Moving through her territory like she'd never been discovered. Never been threatened. Never been anything but what she'd always been. A survivor in a forest that protected her through the simple virtue of being vast and indifferent. I saved that image. Printed it. Kept it in my desk drawer at work. On difficult days, and they were all difficult, I'd look at it and remember. She survived. Despite everything. Despite me. That had to count for something. In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the world. National forests closed. Backcountry access eliminated. The entire outdoor recreation industry suspended indefinitely. Strange silver lining. Subject Sigma's territory became even more protected. No risk of civilian intrusion. No pressure to reopen closed areas. The Dark Divide wilderness was as isolated as it had been in decades. Morrison texted me in April. Best spring for her in years. No human pressure. Abundant resources. She's thriving. I read that message and felt something like peace. Sometimes catastrophe creates sanctuary. Sometimes the worst thing for humans is the best thing for everything else. The closure remained through 2020, 2021, 2022. Reopening discussions happened periodically. Budget reviews, access advocacy groups pushing for restored trail systems. Each time, the Forest Service maintained the same position. Ongoing ecological sensitivity, not yet ready for public access. Maxwell retired in 2021. Her replacement, a younger administrator named Chen, reviewed the closure justifications and maintained them without question. Morrison told me Chen had been briefed on the real reasons, but chose to honor the protection framework. Some secrets are worth keeping, Chen apparently said, especially when breaking them serves no one. In 2023, I turned 65, officially retired from consulting work. Started volunteering with habitat restoration projects around Olympia, planting trees, removing invasive species, small contributions to ecosystems I'd spent decades studying. Morrison still texted, less frequently now, every few months instead of weekly, but the pattern held. Grid activity, audio confirmation, visual, low quality but positive. She was still there, getting older, slowing down, but persisting, and I was still here, also older, also slowing, also persisting. Two creatures who'd shared space across a boundary neither fully crossed, connected by something that wasn't quite language but was definitely communication. Not quite friendship but definitely recognition. She knew me, I knew her, and in knowing, we'd both been changed. September 2024, 5 years after the closure, Morrison called me. Actual phone call, not text. That meant something significant. David, she's not moving well. Last 3 motion sensor hits show extreme mobility impairment. And she hasn't been foraging in her usual areas. My chest tightened. How bad? Bad enough I thought you should know. I was in my car within an hour. 3-hour drive to the Dark Divide. Morrison met me at the locked gate to the closure zone. I'm coming with you, he said. Not asking. Informing. You could lose your job. She's dying, David. and you deserve to be there, so I'm making sure you get through safe and back out without complications. We hiked in at dusk. Morrison carried thermal imaging. I carried nothing but memory and dread. It took 3 hours to reach her core territory. My legs older, the trail more overgrown, the forest darker than I remembered. The thermal picked her up around 2200 hours. Heat signature. Stationary. In a location I recognized. The clearing where I'd first taught her I wasn't a threat. Where we'd established our original boundary. She'd come home to die. Morrison handed me the thermal unit. I'll stay here. You go. You've earned that. I walked alone the final 100 feet. She was lying near the base of an old cedar. Breathing, but still. Not even enough energy to track my approach. I stopped at my old observation distance. 20 feet. The boundary we'd respected for 8 years. Hey, I said quietly. It's me. It's David. Her head moved. Slow. Painful. But she turned to look at me. Those amber brown eyes. Still intelligent. Still aware. I sat down. I'm sorry. For everything. For documenting you. For bringing them into your forest. For disrupting the life you'd built here. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just recording. Making you data. And when they found out, I couldn't stop what happened next. She made a sound. Soft. That low hum I'd heard hundreds of times. Not distress. Almost recognition. I don't know if you understand language, I continued. But I need you to know. You changed everything for me. You showed me that coexistence is possible. That intelligence takes forms we haven't imagined. That the world is bigger and stranger and more precious than our maps can capture. And I'm grateful. So grateful I got to witness even a small part of your life. I stayed silent for a while, just listening to her breathe, to the forest breathing around us. Then I did something I'd never done in 8 years. I stood and walked forward, slowly, hands visible, non-threatening posture. I crossed the boundary. She didn't move, didn't flee, just watched as I approached. I stopped 5 feet away, close enough to see the gray in her hair, the scars on her hands, the tremor in her breathing that meant lungs failing. Can I sit with you? I asked. No response, but no rejection either. I sat, 3 feet away, close enough that I could hear every breath. We stayed like that for hours. 2 old creatures at the end of their respective paths. No more observation, no more documentation, just presence. Around Oro 300, her breathing changed. Slower, shallower. I reached out, slowly, and placed my hand near hers. Not touching, just close. She moved her fingers. Slight, barely perceptible, but intentional. Our hands touched. Hers was warm, rough, the calluses of a lifetime working with stone and wood and earth, the texture of survival. We stayed like that until dawn. She died at 0612 hours, September 18th, 2024. 1 moment breathing. The next, still. I sat with her for another hour. Couldn't process leaving. Couldn't process this being the end. Morrison found us at Oro 730. Took 1 look and understood. I'm sorry, David. She's the last, I said. 8 years of searching and there's never been evidence of others. She's the last of her kind. And I documented her death. You witnessed it. That's different. Is it? Morrison was quiet. Then, what do you want to do? I knew what protocol demanded. Document the body, collect samples, preserve genetic material, notify researchers. This was unprecedented biological evidence. Science demanded preservation, but she wasn't evidence. She was a person. We bury her, I said, here, in this clearing, and we mark it so no one ever disturbs this site. That's destruction of critical scientific material. I don't care. Morrison nodded. Neither do I. Let's do it right. We spent the day digging. No equipment, just hands and a small folding shovel Morrison had brought. We dug deep, 4 feet, in soft earth near the cedar's roots. I arranged her body carefully, positioned her hands as I'd seen her position them when she slept, placed stones around her, markers she'd understand, if understanding persisted in whatever came after. We covered her slowly, respectfully, packed the earth firm, then built a cairn above, river stones arranged in careful pattern. No plaque, no marker, nothing that would draw attention, just stones that would weather and eventually scatter, evidence erasing itself through natural process. Morrison stood over the grave. Should we say something? She wouldn't understand human rituals. Maybe not, but we would. I thought for a moment. Then, she was here. She survived longer than her kind had any right to in this world. She was intelligent, careful, and compassionate. She tolerated me when she should have driven me away. And she taught me that being human means sharing space, not dominating it. That's enough. That's more than enough. Morrison nodded. Rest easy. You're home. We left as the sun set, locked the gate behind us. Morrison would file a report citing animal remains cleared as per protocols. No mention of what species. No acknowledgement that anything extraordinary had occurred. Just another day in forest management. Another routine task. Another bureaucratic entry in endless administrative records that no one would ever read. Perfect obscurity. Perfect ending. I never went back to that clearing. Couldn't. The grief was too immediate, too sharp. I'd spent 8 years observing from a distance, and then in her final hours I'd broken every protocol, crossed every boundary, and held the hand of something that wasn't supposed to exist as it died. That's not scientific detachment. That's love, and love makes terrible science. Morrison kept me updated through late 2024. The closure remained, the cairn undisturbed, the forest slowly reclaiming everything. My old camera positions, the observation points, the trails we'd both worn into the undergrowth through years of parallel movement. Nature erasing evidence like it had never been. In November, Morrison texted something different. Found something, call when you can. I called immediately. What? Juvenile prints, small, fresh, grid sector B8, about 2 miles from her location. I couldn't speak. David, she might not have been alone. Or she had offspring we never documented. Or there are others. I don't know. But there's something here. Don't look for it, I said immediately. What? Don't look. Don't investigate. Just let it be. If there are others, they've survived this long by being invisible. Searching for them just resets the cycle. Morrison was quiet for a long time. You're asking me to ignore potentially the most significant conservation discovery I could make in my career. I'm asking you to choose protection over proof, like I should have from the beginning. Another long silence. Then, okay, I'll log the prints as indeterminate large mammal and move on. But David, if there are others, they deserve protection. Real protection, not just benign neglect. The best protection is being forgotten. Let them fade back into myth. That's the only way they survive. That's not sustainable long-term. Nothing is. But it's better than the alternative. Morrison agreed. Logged his findings vaguely. Filed reports that said nothing specific. Maintained the closure protocols without explanation. And somewhere in the Dark Divide wilderness, something small moved through ancient timber, learning to avoid trails, to read human patterns, to survive in the margins. Maybe. I think about her constantly. The weight of her hand. The texture of skin that was almost human but not quite. The way she looked at me in those final hours, not with fear, not with resentment, but with something that felt like understanding. Like she knew I'd tried, that I'd failed, that failure was inevitable but effort still mattered. I think about the footage still encrypted on drives stored in 3 locations. 8 years of documentation, proof that would rewrite textbooks, launch careers, answer questions humans have asked for centuries, and I think about deleting it. All of it. Erasing the evidence completely so there's no temptation for future researchers, no possibility of exploitation, no risk that someone less careful will pick up where I left off. But I can't. Because maybe someday the world will be ready. Maybe someday we'll have frameworks for coexistence that don't require dominance and categorization. Maybe someday protecting something won't require proving it exists. Maybe. So the drives remain. Encrypted. Stored. Waiting for a wisdom we haven't developed yet. I'm 67 now. Good health, but declining. The knees that carried me through 8 years of backcountry hiking are giving out. The hands that operated cameras in freezing rain are starting to shake with essential tremor. Time is finite. I'm running out. I've started writing everything down. Not for publication, never for publication, but for the record, for whoever finds the encrypted drives after I'm gone, for the explanation they'll need to understand why these files exist and why they were hidden. I'm writing this so they'll know. Documentation isn't discovery. Witnessing isn't ownership. And sometimes the most important thing you can do with knowledge is choose not to share it. I'm writing this so they'll understand. She was real. She was intelligent. She was alone. And she deserved to live undisturbed, even if that meant dying unacknowledged. I'm writing this so they'll forgive me, for documenting her, for failing to protect her completely, for being the bridge between her world and ours that ultimately brought danger to her doorstep. She forgave me, I think, in those final hours, when she let me cross the boundary and sit beside her, when she moved her hand those few inches to touch mine. That was forgiveness. And goodbye. Morrison still patrols that area. He's asked for that assignment specifically every season since 2019. He texts me occasionally. Never anything specific, just acknowledgement that he's keeping watch. The closure remains. Budget reviews happen. Access advocacy groups continue pushing. And every year, the Forest Service maintains the same position. Ecological sensitivity requires continued restriction. Code 4, we're protecting something we can't name. It's not perfect. It's not sustainable indefinitely. Eventually, budget constraints will force reopening, or new administrators will question old decisions, or satellite imagery will advance enough that no canopy can hide thermal signatures. Eventually, someone will find what Morrison found, and they'll investigate, and the cycle will begin again. But for now, for these years, there's protection. Imperfect, bureaucratic, but real. And if there are others out there, learning to survive, adapting to a world that encroaches daily into their territories, then maybe these years buy them time. Time to adapt, time to hide deeper, time to become myth so completely that reality can't find them. Maybe. I dream about her still. In the dreams, we're both young. The forest is endless. She has family, a mate, offspring, a community. She's not the last. She's just one among many, living in a world vast enough to hold them all. In the dreams, I never cross the boundary, never document, never interfere. I'm just there, present, witnessing in the purest sense, seeing without recording, knowing without proving. And she sees me too, acknowledges me with that low hum that means I know you're there and it's okay. Then I wake, and she's gone, and I'm alone in a rental apartment in Olympia, 67 years old, carrying the weight of 8 years that no one knows about and a grief that has no public expression. But I also carry this, the certainty that coexistence is possible, that intelligence takes forms we're only beginning to understand, that the world is stranger and more precious than our science has yet captured. And I carry her hand in mine, those final hours, the warmth of it, the impossible reality of it, the trust it represented. That's not data, that's not evidence, that's not science, that's grace, and it's enough.